Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another musical JewelBox with the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. We're talking this week with Jeffrey Brillhart, who is going to be our harpsichord and conductor for our Brandenburg and Baroque concert that's coming up in the 21-22 season. We're very excited for that, and we're so glad to have him here with us today. And of course, we just came out of a fabulous little harpsichord recital. And so welcome, Jeff. And could you tell us how you're doing and tell us a little bit about the piece that we just heard?
Hi, Josh. It's great to be here and great to see you and great to see you smile without a mask on. So it's the one nice thing about Zoom is not having to wear a mask and being able to have facial expression. So all is well. We're making music slightly in different ways, but definitely thinking about the future. The piece you just heard was a wonderful piece by Jacques Dufy called La Forêt and very, very poignant piece for the harpsichord that really explores the wonderful sonorities of the low range of a harpsichord.
Yeah, and it's always so fun to get to hear just harpsichord music on its own because we're all very familiar with harpsichords, but I don't think everyone knows as much about harpsichords as they might like. I mean, I think when we think of keyboards, we always go to the piano first, and I think especially in my younger years, you just think, harpsichord, piano, it's just like a piano, but that sounds a little bit different. But the way it functions, there are different ways that you have to play them, and more importantly, there's different ways that you have to express through them, and the composers work through them that are very, very different from like a hammer and wire piano.
Very much so, very much so. And it's funny, when I was in college many years ago, the harpsichord revival had not yet really started. And I recall a music history teacher that was referred to the harpsichord as skeleton, the sound of a skeleton on barbed wire. And thank heavens that era is gone. And the harpsichord really, I think it's very mainstream. Here at Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church, we were able to acquire a really wonderful harpsichord. It's the instrument you just heard several years ago, and the interest on the part of the congregation in this instrument has been phenomenal. When it's played, people come up afterward. They want to see it. They want to hear it up close, and it's really quite a fantastically expressive instrument, in spite of the fact that when you strike a key, you have just one dynamic. There are many, many things that you can do to control the expressivity that are not related to just simply the hammer, um, um, not the quill striking the string.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church because, of course, you're not just a harpsichord and conductor, but you are an organist and you teach organ improvisation at Yale. And
Right.
I would love to hear where does the organ, I mean, the organ itself is such a storied, lord of all the instruments that come before it. It's an orchestra of its own kind of making. And improvisation is so key to real organists in churches and have been going back to Bach and before. And that kind of comes through with a lot of this harpsichord repertoire, doesn't it? Because so many of these composers from the Baroque were also church organists. And so moving from one instrument to the other,
Yeah.
they had to influence each other somehow, right?
Well, they did, and of course, they're both the historic pipe organs are mechanical beasts, just like the harpsichord. When you play an historic pipe organ, you're striking a key that is connected through levers to pallets underneath pipes. So it's a very mechanical experience, just like the harpsichord is. And as you say, many of the harpsichord, most of the harpsichord composers in the Baroque period were also organists. It was interesting. Rameau, his first job was he signed, can you imagine, a 29-year contract to be a church organist. 29 years. Who signs a contract for 29 years? And he hated it and and wanted to leave. This was in a small town in France, Montpellier, and he wanted to be in Paris, and the church wouldn't let him out of his job. So what did Rameau do? Rameau was a very clever and brilliant man. Rameau started playing very poorly. And in his improvisations, he would play horrendous sonorities and use the ugliest sounds the organ could possibly make until the church decided, well, we have to get rid of him. So that was how he got out of his 29-year contract so that he could move to Paris.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Rameau because, of course, we have more music coming for everyone at home. That's what we do, you know. And we have some Rameau pieces, Rameau piece coming up for us, not only on your concert, but also on the harpsichord. And we did a fun little thing that we haven't done on the JewelBox thus far, in that we actually have two takes
Yes.
of the same piece in order to get a little bit about what makes the Baroque harpsichord style so unique and different from another type of concert that we could have, in that ornamentation is such a huge part of this style. And so you've given us an example of the piece without any ornamentation at all, right?
Yes. So this is from the opera Les Boréades, and it's the Entrée de Polomnie, and very incredibly beautiful. It's a dance movement in the opera. Incredibly beautiful music. Actually, this was the last opera that Rameau finished. He was at the end of his life. He had a very long and productive and quite lucrative career. I mean, he died a rich man, which is something that most musicians cannot say. But this is a very beautiful piece, and it's scored, as is typical of Rameau, not just for strings, but for strings and woodwinds. It was something, a sonority that Rameau loved, and that was so important, became so important in France, that every French composer since Rameau favored the use of woodwinds. So you see in Debussy, wonderful writing for woodwinds, in Messiaen even. So Rameau, he's the father of all this. So in this beautiful piece, it begins with the bassoon simply playing a scale, downward scale, dee da dee da dee da da, and then the strings pick up that scale. It's very simple. As it's written, it's not very interesting. So that's what you'll hear first. This is a harpsichord transcription of the piece, so obviously without all of the color of the winds and the strings. But what you'll hear is just the notes that Rameau wrote, without any interpretation, and it's quite dry.
Right. So let's listen to that for about a minute, and then we'll come back and see what we can do afterward.
So one of the challenging issues in interpreting French Baroque music is in looking at the score and determining what to do with the score. Let me start this all over again. When one sees a French Baroque score, orchestral or organ or harpsichord, at first glance it looks very straight and rather dry. So it was just understood in this period that one did certain things with the phrasing that could not even be notated. And I'll see if I can explain this in a way that makes sense. You'll hear it more clearly when I play it. Um, the device is called inégal, or unequal. And it's a way of playing particularly stepwise motion, a scale, for example, which makes this piece a great example because of the bassoon. Dee, da, 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 da. He writes it just straight eighth notes. But in interpreting it, we would apply an effect called inégal, which means then that we play the eighth notes, but they're not equal. So it becomes dee da dee da dee da da. And it's not dim ba dum ba da, but dee dee da. It's a very musical, fluid kind of approach. And it can't be notated because it's not exactly triplet and it's not a dotted eighth with a 16th note. It's somewhere in between. And it's something that at the keyboard is fairly easy to do, but with an orchestra it's harder because everybody has to agree. And these things take time. So in the course of a rehearsal, one might, for this particular piece, the whole piece is, under 5 minutes long. Ordinarily, you would budget 15 to 20 minutes for a 5-minute piece, of orchestra time. With this repertoire, you need more time because the string players have to agree exactly on how long the elongated notes are. Dee-ah, 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 da. So that's inégal, and there are many, many rules about inégal. For example, if there's a leap of more than a fourth, you would not play inégal. And it becomes so perplexing that I think that's a good part of the reason why this music isn't played as often as it should. Rameau is incredibly gorgeous, even sensuous music, but it's very hard to interpret. So that's one aspect. The other, of course, are the trills, and one can add trills. One can add other kinds of ornaments that were very unique to France. Because you would go to Germany, we go to Bach, or we go to Italy to Vivaldi or Sammartini, and if they write a scale passage, it's going to be played dee da 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 da. It's never going to be dee da dee da dee da da. So I hope that's a little clear.
Yeah, well, we can use our own ears and see if we can tease out that difference based on all that great information you just given us. So now let's hear that same piece we heard just a couple minutes ago, but now with all of the ornamentation inégal and in its entirety here.
Yes.
All right, so thanks for that. And that really, what a difference it can make to add all of that ornamentation back in and really feel the Frenchness of it.
Yeah, and actually, there was one moment I did not point out, but you may have noticed in just hearing the second that also in the score he has thirds that are slurred, and in the case of French Baroque music, if it were German, it would be tia 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 tia, but in the case of the French, it can be dium dium dum dium dium di. It's up to the conductor to make that decision. But I chose that rhythm is called a Lombard rhythm, and I chose to make that decision. So we have the Inegal tia 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 ti, and then the Lombard dium 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 da. So
Great. And speaking of the Germans, it is not just Rameau that we have
oh
on this concert. So we've got Vivaldi, Sammartini, and the ultimate Johann Sebastian.
yes.
So why don't you start off with what made you want to pair these composers with the Rameau? Was there something about these composers that you wanted to draw comparisons or contrast or?
Well, yeah, I really, my thinking about this was that let's choose the greatest German Baroque composer, Bach. You can't, that indisputable. Let's choose the greatest French Baroque composer, and Rameau. I think I'm certain of that actually. And when you come to the concerts next year, you're going to hear three spectacular examples of Rameau. And then thinking of the Italians, there were so many, but Vivaldi, of course, is so appealing. Partly also because Bach knew Vivaldi's works, and Bach liked so much Vivaldi's music that he actually transcribed several of the concertos for the organ, which is, I think, really remarkable. Bach certainly never would have met Vivaldi, but he knew of Vivaldi because of Vivaldi's publisher in Holland. So Bach was able to secure Vivaldi scores and fell in love with it. And then there's Sammartini, who kind of, doesn't figure in at first glance until you dive in a little more deeply and see that really the symphonies, the origins of the symphony were with Sammartini. The genre symphony, a multi-movement work where one of the movements is a sonata form, began with Sammartini. And although Haydn vehemently disagreed, it's very much thought that Sammartini was a direct influence of Haydn. So many things that Haydn did were reflective of Sammartini's music. Sammartini's ability to take a motive and vary it and develop it. I mean, that whole idea of development in a development section of a sonata, that was Sammartini. So I started listening to Sammartini's symphonies, and I did not know his music well at all. I was blown away. It's vivacious music. It's lively. Unlike Beethoven, it's not long-winded. I love Beethoven. Who doesn't, right? But Sammartini is just very, very concise. And when you hear Sammartini, you absolutely hear the precursor to Mozart and to Haydn. Haydn was I believe 7 years old when Sammartini wrote his first symphony. So, it's all the same era. And Sammartini really does straddle Baroque into the classic era. So that's how I settled on Rameau and Bach and Sammartini. And I decided that rather than, program all the Rameau together and then the Sammartini together, I thought it would be really interesting to almost create a symphony of disparate parts. So the symphony begins with Vivaldi, in a sense, and then it moves into a stunning Rameau and then a Sammartini, and then the second half begins with Rameau and then more Sammartini and then more Rameau and then Bach at the end. So I'm really excited about the program. I think the audience is going to go nuts as well.
Yeah. And I think just as one last topic before we have a last musical selection to play us out, but I mean the big one at the end of the program, we have Brandenburg. I think it's Brandenburg number 4, right?
Yes.
Because I mean we all know, I mean the Brandenburg concertos are such a huge part of Bach's reputation. For the for the uninitiated, what's your quickest way through? What are the Brandenburg concertos, and why do they hold us so captive?
Well, there's six concertos. It's interesting. Bach went to Berlin to pick up a new harpsichord, right? So, um, and just the thought of Bach traveling, to Berlin to get a harpsichord just delights me, no end. And while he was there, he had the occasion to play for the Margrave Ludwig of Brandenburg at the court. And that meeting, of that performance for him, inspired the Margrave to invite Bach to send him some compositions. So Bach wrote 6 suites for harpsichord and an orchestra. Sadly, they were never performed, and by the Brandenburg family. So, and we don't know why. It might have been because they were too difficult, and they are challenging. It may have been that he really did not have the instrumental resources to pull this off. We don't know. And it doesn't really matter, because the result of this visit to Berlin to pick up a harpsichord was a set of 6 of the most engaging works of the Baroque period. And each is just incredibly different from the other. Each is its own masterpiece. I love the fourth because it showcases the flutes so wonderfully, and the chamber orchestra is blessed with wonderful flautists. I have to say that choosing repertoire for this orchestra is such a joy, because I've known so many of the players for so many years, and they're all just so talented. So it's really exhilarating to choose music for an ensemble that is not going to have any technical issues at all. That from the minute we hit the ground in the first rehearsal, it's going to be about making music and discovering the music together. So with this particular concerto, the writing for the flute is really great. It's the only concerto of the 6 that uses all of the instruments that Bach used in the 6 concertos. So, for example, other concertos only used strings and harpsichord. Others might use, an oboe or a flute. But here, everybody gets into the show, and that's really exciting.
Great. Well, we can't wait for that. And so we have just one more musical selection until we can actually get to this concert ourselves next February.
Yes,
As
yes.
we're still looking ahead into the mist and the fog of what this all looks like. But so our last selection does include some of our wonderful and incredible players
Right.
in a recital that you did out at Bryn Mawr. And if you just set that up for us, we can play us into the night with our last nightcaps of Sunday afternoon before Monday morning hits us.
Oh, absolutely. So it's dangerous to talk about favorite players, but I'm going to just say it. I love Branson Yeast and Elizabeth Thompson. I love them. They're magnificent cellists. They're magnificent people. And it's been my great joy to work with them, numerous times here at Bryn Mawr. And one of the things that we did when the pandemic hit, we made a commitment to have a large number of Facebook Live concerts, specifically so that we could hire musicians from Local 77, primarily from the chamber orchestra, entirely from the chamber orchestra, so that their income streams could continue. For this concert, Elizabeth arranged for 2 cellos and harpsichord. She took Marin Marais' wonderful viol de gamba pieces and arranged them. And they're brilliant. They're just, it's a whole suite of pieces. She may have another career there, if she ever decides to stop performing, she could go into the arranging business. But what you'll hear is the final movement of this suite, which is just as lively and as fun as it can possibly be. And you really see Branson. Branson is the solo cellist, and then he is backed up by Elizabeth on cello and me. On that quick note, when you have a grouping of musicians that's harpsichord and cello, that is referred to as the continuo group. Okay, so every Baroque opera has a continuo group. The Brandenburg concertos, there's a continuo group, so there's a cellist that's assigned to that particular bass part. There's the harpsichordist, and a standard convention in Baroque music. But this final movement is fantastic. You'll love it.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Jeff. We're really looking forward to hearing this concert. We're really looking forward to hearing this piece with our wonderful players, Branson and Elizabeth. Also, quick note for the summer concerts that we have coming up that you will get a lot more information of after Easter. You may see Branson Yeast again doing some CPE Bach cello concertos out in the beautiful summertime air. So we've got a lot to look forward to in addition to just Baroque concerts. So thanks, Jeff, for being with us. Thanks, everyone, for coming back with us this month for Musical JewelBox. And we hope you enjoy the show.